Welcome everybody, and I'm so glad so many of you could join us today for the webinar, Minimizing Risk in Your 2015 Sales Process. My name is John Golden. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer with Pipeliner CRM, and helping me today as host is Rachel Miller, who's Chief Listener with Pipeliner. And this webinar is brought to you by Pipeliner CRM. Today we're going to talk about minimizing risk in your 2015 sales process. And just to set the stage, I'm going to provide some very clear action items that you can immediately execute on. So this isn't a theory session. This is a theory-free zone. We're going to keep it practical and we're going to keep it actionable. Okay, so let's have a quick look at what we're going to cover in the webinar. Well, first of all, we're going to talk about optimizing your sales process and how you can take some of the risk out of it for 2015. And then we're going to talk about how you can ensure that sales process is buyer focused rather than internally focused or seller focused, buyer focused. And then we're going to look at, okay, once you've got your sales process optimized and it's buyer focused, how can you more efficiently actually manage that process? Okay? All right, well, let's get going. And just to set the scene for a moment, let's just talk about, why is a sales process even important? Well, here's something from ZS Associates, where they tell you best-in-class companies were far more likely than their industry average or laggard counterparts to have a well-communicated, formal, broadly adopted sales process, and ones that had specific activities and steps and tools to reinforce value. So that's a study that was done by ZS Associates. And in fact, here's another one. Here's another example, right, from Sales Management Association. Their study showed high-performing sales organizations are more likely to guide salespeople with formal activities, ensure the sales process is understood and implemented, actually train their salespeople. And then, very important, actually routinely assess the effectiveness. So let's go back and check all the time that the sales process is actually being effective and achieving the goals that you set out. And there's a host of other studies that I could cite, but they all point to that top performing sales organizations have well-defined and very well managed sales processes. So that's why it's important. And not to really belabor the point, but just to state the obvious. And as we know, the obvious isn't always taken on board, but to underline it with a big fat Sharpie, if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. So if you don't have a well-defined process, or you don't have a process at all, and it's not managed and optimized, then the salespeople will kind of make up their own and they'll follow their individual processes. And quite frankly, you'll spend, as a sales manager, an awful lot of time just trying to make sense of the pipeline. In other words, you're going to be in reactive kind of head-scratching mode rather than proactive management mode. So that's what we're going to look at today. How we can get our sales process really working in our favor. All right, well, what we're going to do is we're going to start off with a quick poll, okay? And Rachel's going to launch the poll now. And we're asking the question, a simple question: does your organization have a formal, well-defined sales process? And the options are yes, no, or not sure. So I'm going to give you a couple of moments to do that, to answer the poll question there. Okay, good. Looks like we have most people are answering it right now. Excellent. Just give it a couple more seconds. All right, thanks. Okay, Rachel's launching the results. So it looks like we have about 36% of people say yes, we have a formal sales process. Another 50 say no, and 14 aren't sure. So, okay, well, interesting statistics. So there you go. So there's 36% that have a sales process and 50% that don't have a formal one and 14% who don't know. So what I'm going to talk about next is, for those of you in the 36%, and it does apply to everybody as well, but the 36%, you say, okay, well, we already have a sales process, so, do we even need to listen to the rest of this webinar? Well, let me just draw your attention to a couple of things. Let's look at some recent studies. The Corporate Executive Board, their Sales Executive Council, did a famous study a couple of years ago that showed that 57% of purchase decisions are completed before the customer even calls a supplier. And then Serious Decisions, they did another study and they upped the ante by 10%, indeed. And they said 67% of the buyer's journey is done digitally. So the bottom line is buyer behavior is changing. So for me, the percentages don't matter that much, to be honest, because the percentages will differ from different type of sale, different type of customer. But what's critical is the fact that buyer behavior is changing. And maybe in your case, maybe your buyer behavior is changing a lot. Maybe it's only changing a little, but I'm willing to bet that it's changing. So the question you have to ask yourself is, has your sales process changed with it? Okay, because if your buyer behavior has changed and you're still using a sales process that belongs to the pre-change era, then you're out of alignment. So align with your buyer's buying process. That's fundamental to creating an effective sales process in the first place, because you need to reflect how your buyer likes to buy, and that's how your sales process needs to reflect how your buyer likes to buy. It's common sense, right? But as we all know, common sense is not that common. And there's still plenty of people in organizations who focus internally and build their sales process to match how they like to sell and to fit internal processes, right? Rather than how they like to buy, how your customer likes to buy. I mean, this is a huge risk, because chances are you're going to be misaligned, and worse, you're actually communicating to your buyer that you don't understand them. You don't know what they want to be accommodated during the buying process. You don't know how they want to be accommodated during the buying process. So in essence, you're really trying to control them. I mean, you're trying to get them to fit to your process, which, in the era of an empowered buyer, it's not a great strategy to try and get them to fit to your process, right? And then, of course, you're wasting time, you're wasting money, you're wasting resources on chasing business that, to be honest, you're not likely to get if you're that misaligned. And worse, top it all off, what are you doing? You're creating a contrast between you and perhaps one of your competitors who is aligned with their buying process. And what are you doing? You're actually, casting that competitor in a better light. So you're actually helping them with their sales process and their sales cycles by showing that they're aligned to how the buyer wants to buy and you're not. So again, not a great place to be. So let's talk immediately action items. So it's great to talk about alignment with the buyer, etc. So, but how do you actually achieve alignment with the buyer? Well, the first thing is you need to sit down, select a couple of your recent successful sales, and really do a diagnosis, an in-depth review of them. Like, go through the process, pay particular attention to how the customer was behaving at each juncture, and involve marketing if they played a role, and as they probably did, and maybe even customer service, but do a real deep dive on it. And then go and talk to those customers. Talk to those brand new customers and get their insights, right? Somebody asked me recently, actually, at a talk, how do we understand our buyers' buying process? And I said, obviously, go talk to your buyers, right? So again, sit down with those new customers, have a conversation with them, and ask them to walk you through their buying process. Okay, and why is this critically important? Well, let me share with you a quick anecdote from back, as Rachel mentioned. I ran a company called Hathaway, which is a global sales consultancy, and we had one of our supposed habits was every time we got a new customer was to really sit down and dissect their buying process. But of course, with one thing or another, never didn't always happen. Sometimes things went into implementation or something else came up. But back 3 or 4 years ago, the largest customer that we gained that year, which is a multi-billion-dollar components manufacturer, we did actually sit down and have a conversation with them. And to be honest, what we learned completely changed the way that we approached selling from then on, because they told us that they had made a decision 8 months earlier to do a sales performance improvement initiative. And so they brought a small committee together. They drew up a list of 10 vendors who they thought could fulfill this for them. And they divided them up amongst the group, and they said, okay, off you go. Go research your collection of vendors. Find out as much as you can about them, but do not, and the big caveat was, do not contact them. Do not alert them to the fact that we're looking. So for 6 or 7 months, they researched. They went online. They looked at looked at everybody's websites, read their white papers, went onto LinkedIn, and networked there to find out about them. And after 7 or 8 months, they whittled this down to 3 companies. So there's a couple of important takeaways from that, right? Number one, 10 providers, vendors were in a sales cycle for 8 months that they knew nothing about. 7 of those still don't know that they were ever in that sales cycle. And what we learned out of it is that if it wasn't for the fact that we had some decent stuff available and we were able to be researched and had a decent network of advocates, that we wouldn't have made the cut either. So going forward, what we decided to do was make sure that we made it easy to be researched, that we paid a lot more attention to our alumni network and our advocates, and we really made sure that that was part of our sales process, was to enable self-discovery on behalf of the buyer. So as you can see, going through the discipline of sitting down and asking customers and walking you through their buying process can actually fundamentally change how you approach the market. Then I would also advocate, go to your existing customers, take a cross-section, small, medium, large, do the same thing, interview them, ask them about their buying process and whether their habits have changed. And then finally also reach out to some late-stage prospects you lost and interview them. I know this is difficult and sometimes it's hard to get them to talk to you, but if you can just get a couple of them and ask them, was your selling process aligned with their buying process and how they like to buy? Again, this is going to give you a fantastic amount of information that you can then use to either build a sales process from scratch or validate the one that you have already. And with that, I'd like to actually ask another poll question. I'd like to understand, for those of you who have a sales process, how often do you validate or revalidate your target customer's buying process and habits? And even for those of you who don't or are not sure, answer this: how often do you think you should? Okay, so everybody participate in the poll. How often do you validate or revalidate your target customer's buying process and habits, or how often should you?
And while everybody is taking the poll, we do have a question from the audience. Eric
Yes.
is asking, John, do you advise having the sales team do this auditing on your 3 to 4 successful sales, or do you recommend others in the company doing it?
I think ideally it's sales and marketing. So I mean, if you have normally you have a pretty good relationship with somebody who's just become your customer, you just sold to. So having the salesperson and somebody from marketing actually doing having the conversation and doing the diagnosis with the customer is ideal, because there are things that will come up that maybe a salesperson won't immediately latch on to that a marketing person might, and vice versa. So I would always advocate both. And to be honest, sometimes it would be good actually to have maybe a customer service person on there too, because they can learn a lot about it as well. And I found that most customers if they've had a good experience in the buying process with you, will actually accommodate this process for you, and I'd be happy to provide you with this kind of information. So yeah, I would advocate a cross section of people, because you're going to capture some things that other people won't. And it just, and what I'm not talking about like booking a half day or a day with your buyer. I mean, literally getting on the phone with them, or having a meeting for about an hour, even 45 minutes can give you a huge amount of insight.
Okay, I'll give people a few more seconds to share their thoughts, and then I will close the poll.
Yeah. And as I said, this is something that's very easy to overlook at times. When you when you win a deal and you get into implementation or you're off chasing a new one, it's very easy to overlook just doing that kind of debrief with the new customer. But you could be missing a lot because of it. And yeah, even and with existing customers, it's if you have quarterly business reviews with them or catch-ups, it's very easy to get caught up in just talking about your solution and how it's working for them or whatever, and forget to actually ask them about whether their buying habits have changed. So it's just something to make a note of. Make sure you do it on a regular basis so that you just keep your finger on the pulse of things that are happening with customers and their buying habits.
Okay, the poll results are in. 8% of folks said once a year, 31% said regularly, at least quarterly, 23% said whenever the customer brings it up, 8% said can't remember, and 31% said we don't.
Right. Well, the thing is that I would advocate that you do it regularly. Once a year, I would say at a minimum, you should do this process. But given how quickly buying behavior is changing, that I would use almost every opportunity you have. And if you have quarterly business reviews with customers, or if you once a quarter say, I'm going to select a few of our new customers and do this process, I think it'll pay off for you, because I just think we've seen so many changes in buying behavior over the last couple of years, and it's just accelerated, that it's worth probably doing it more often than you probably typically would have in the past. Okay, so you've got all this data, right? What next? Well, this is where I think that sales leadership and marketing leadership need to sit down and really look at the information that you've gathered, and look at your current sales process if you have one, and then from the information you've gathered, kind of validate whether your sales process seems to support the buying habits of your target buyer. Or you may need to completely, you may just need to tweak it. You may completely need to redesign it, or if you don't have one, you need to build one from the ground up. But these are where your user and your buyer insights can really provide the foundation for an aligned process. And why marketing leadership involved as well? Well, go back to those statistics earlier about how far a buyer is into the buying process before they interact with the seller. Stands to reason that a lot of the sales process now that was traditionally handled by sales is actually often being handled by marketing, or there is blurred lines and overlap, and marketing is going further into the sales process than ever before, and actually salespeople have to adopt some of marketing tactics like micro-marketing at various points of the process too. So it is really critical that both disciplines are involved in this process, so that you really come out with a sales process that's properly aligned with your buyer. So let's talk about what I believe are the four components, the four building blocks, if you like, of an effective sales process. Now, I'm going to go through them in detail one by one, but let me just introduce them to you now. Right. First, clearly defined stages. Second, ones with buyer validated actions in them that have clearly identified target advances, and have value added resources that can be leveraged throughout the process. So let's talk about clearly defined stages. As you can probably tell from my accent, I'm not from the US. I'm actually originally from Ireland, but I've been in this country long enough that I do understand a little bit about American football, your football. What I don't understand about it is, why a 60-minute game takes 3.5 hours to complete, but that's a discussion topic for another day. But think about it in football terms for a moment, right? A significant progress in football is like getting a first down, right? It's not getting 2 yards or whatever. It's significant progress. So when you're defining the stages of your sales process, you shouldn't be looking to create a stage for every micro step in the buying process, right? Because that's going to make it unwieldy. it's going to become unmanageable, and it's not going to make a massive amount of sense, So it's just like, your first down is significant. The little bits that happened before that, may contribute to it, but in and of themselves, they're not defining a significant, piece of progress really. So look for major points of progress, and ideally keep your sales process between 4 and 6 stages, depending on the complexity of your buyer journey. You can have more, less is kind of can be a little bit pointless, but ideally between 4 and 6, and keep them clearly defined. So let's look at a quick example. Here's a 6-step process, right? And I'm using a software sale here as an example, right? So take stage 2, right? You get a chance to demo the product, right? So you've qualified them as they look like, they fit your profile of your ideal target customer. And now stage 2, you actually engage with them and they agree to allow you to demo the product, right? So that's a significant process. In stage 3, through your communications, you get to uncover their pain points. You are able to map your solution to them, so you're able to really present them with a value proposition. Significant progress. They like it. They agree to accept a proposal. Significant progress, etc. So as you can see, each step needs to be clearly defined by something significant happening in the sales process that's moving it closer to moving the sale closer, so that something is happening. There's an interaction between you and the buyer, where the buyer is doing something significant that is giving you the information that the sales process is actually moving forward. So within those stages, what I always say is you really, really need to have buyer validated actions. And why is that? Well, think about how many times have you seen a salesperson, fall into the trap where they join dots that may not be there, or they add 1 and 1 and get 5. Here's a simple example, right? So I, as a salesperson, I have a conversation with a prospect, and during the conversation, the prospect tells me, oh, the CEO is behind this initiative, and our team really needs it, and my manager's behind it, this is extremely important. And I have my happy ears on as an optimistic salesperson, and I hear, okay, that sounds like funds are going to be made available. Yes, this is going to be budgeted. That's fine. I'm good with that. So I go back believing, because of these things that I heard, that there's going to be funds available for this initiative, right? Well, there's a big difference between that and the buyer explicitly stating the budget will be available. So what's my point? Well, my point is to have actions in each of the stages that are explicit and buyer oriented. So don't leave it up to interpretation by the salesperson. Make them actually have to validate something and sign off that this is validated. So let's look at an example, right? So here's a stage 1. So spoken live with the prospect. What does that mean? It means, as it states, I have actually spoken live with the prospect, right? Not that I've spoken to somebody else. I've spoken live with them, or I've had direct email contact. Not I haven't the first one, I haven't left a voicemail, right? For instance, I've spoken live. I've confirmed their interest in the software. They've informed me why they're interested in the software. They've signed up for a trial. I've confirmed that they've signed up, right? Or persuade them and confirm. These are explicit, right? There's no room for interpretation here. These are actual things that I have to confirm have happened. Rather, as I've seen so many times in the past, is, salespeople, if you don't have these steps as explicit things to look for, will kind of nuance them or interpret them or sort of give you what they think is happening as opposed to what is actually happening. And one other thing I recommend here is, as much as possible, to try and put a scoring system in place. And it doesn't have to be elaborate. But for instance here, we've allotted 2 points for each of these different actions, and you have to get a minimum of 6 in order to complete the stage. Just a big believer in, what gets measured, who gets managed. And so people pay attention to it, and salespeople as competitive people, right? The idea of actually earning points to move something forward kind of fits in with their psyche as well, and it really helps the process. And as I said again, it starts to take a lot of that subjectivity out of the process, and that's what you're trying to do here. Is you're trying to get to take as much subjectivity out of the process, as much interpretation or nuance, and you're really trying to get down to things that you can point to that show progress in a sale.
So I'm going to interject real quick. We have a question from the audience. What are the most common number of stages in a sales process?
Well, between 6 and 8. Six I always think is a very good number of stages. I've seen that with a lot of sales organizations because it's manageable and it fits with, normally in most sales processes or buying journeys. It's quite easy to see at least 6 very distinct stages in it. I've seen ones go up as high as 8, where it's maybe a more complex sale, and I've seen very effective ones that are, 4 steps when it's maybe a little bit more straightforward of a sale. And in some organizations, if you're maybe focused on small companies, one group is focused on small companies, maybe one group is focused on enterprise, then the sales process for the small maybe 4 steps, and the sales process for the enterprise maybe 8 steps. So you may have 2 different ones, but generally speaking, I think if you keep it between 6 and 8, you'll be in pretty good shape. Okay, so the next thing of the pillars of a really good sales process are including target advances. And so I really highly recommend that each stage has some target advances defined that'll help the salesperson get the opportunity to into the next stage. So rather than, again, leaving this to interpretation or guesswork, it really helps define some of them, right? And to be honest, advances versus continuations is still one of the most powerful distinctions in a sales process, and one that, unfortunately, many salespeople and sales managers, they don't often pay enough attention to the difference. Just let me give you a quick example of here's a classic continuation that's often misinterpreted as progress in a sale. So let's say I have a meeting with the prospect. The meeting ends. We talk next steps. They say, great meeting, love this, fantastic, let's have a follow-up meeting. We go into it in more detail in 2 weeks. And you think, fantastic, we stick it on the calendar even. I leave happy, progress, fantastic, hooray for me. And I get back, tell my manager, call was great, fantastic, we're going to have another meeting in 2 weeks and a more in-depth conversation, and we're all happy. But if you take a step back for a moment, right, is the sale really advancing? I'd argue it isn't, because between now and the next meeting, prospect's not doing anything, right? Isn't doing any work, isn't really taking any action, right? So alternatively, if I set the meeting, then I ask them, I want you to bring a key influencer into it. Okay, I want you to introduce me to them via email. I want you to brief them on it. Maybe if, again, taking the software sale example, I want you to, set you up on the system, and I want you to put some demo in, or some data of your own data in there, so it'll really help us have the conversation in a real world context with your colleague. So now you can see I've just given them a load of work to do, right? The prospect's doing work. You're going off, they're introducing me to an influencer, they're making sure they're coming into the meeting, they're going into the software, they're putting in some data, they're now working, so they're engaged, they're invested in the process, right? That's an advance. So there's a big difference between the two. So defining target advances, helps the salesperson know what to aim for and kind of what progress looks like. So again, to reinforce that point is I would actually define these and have them as part of your process. So if somebody is completing a stage, they know what kind of advances they should be looking for to set themselves up for success in the next stage, and for you to be able to see, yes, there's clear progress in this sale. So Yeah, make sure you always get advances, and you make sure as much as possible to avoid those continuation loops, which can cleverly disguise themselves as progress, but when you really look at them closely, you realize prospect's not doing anything. I'm doing all the work, they're doing nothing, so they're not really that engaged or invested in the process. Okay, and the fourth one, finally, value-added resources. So, why are value-added resources important? Well, I would argue that they're more critical than ever because, again, we have an educated, empowered buyer and one who wants to be educated, empowered, wants to make informed decisions. So the more you can provide them with resources and tools that are appropriate for the particular stage of the process you're in, the better it's going to be for you. So whether those are, a white paper that is applicable to, let's take the software example again. So maybe, we're coming up to the proposal stage, having a document that does cost comparisons, right, between you and like software. I mean, that would be a good thing to have at that point. When you're establishing the value proposition, case studies, maybe a good thing to have. So just actually sitting down, and again, it's a great thing between sales and marketing, sitting down and defining, what are the documents, what are the resources and tools that are applicable to each stage, and then embedding them, if you can, into the stages. So if you're using a CRM system, I would obviously recommend Pipeliner. You can actually embed those documents into each stage and make sure that they're available for that stage. This really helps because, at times salespeople kind of get stuck and they don't know, what they should do during a stage, and maybe they're waiting for, some action on behalf of the buyer. This gives them a great opportunity to make, additional contacts. So to be able to say, oh, during this process, I understand, you're evaluating the proposal. Here's actually a white paper that compares costs and onboarding. You may find this useful at this stage. So again, it's really providing your buyer with information and ways of making their own decision and informing themselves, and really showing you as a value provider throughout the process. Okay, let's. We haven't done a poll question in a while. Let's hit another poll question here. So let's see. Do you think sales and marketing in your organization understand that defining and supporting a sales process is a shared responsibility? That's a bit of a mouthful, but I think you get my point. So do sales and marketing realize that defining and supporting a sales process is actually a shared responsibility?
Yeah, this is a hot topic, so we'll see. I think if you're in whichever camp you fall into, you have a very different opinion.
Yeah. Well, it's funny you should say that, because anytime I write anything that is anyway related to sales and marketing alignment, it seems to be the most read articles or posts that I do. So it is still a hot topic. And in fact, Neil Rackham, the author of Spin Selling, and Philip Kotler of the marketing guru of the Kellogg Business School, wrote an article for the Harvard Business Review. I think it's maybe even 8-9 years ago, called "Ending the War Between Sales and Marketing," and it is the article that became the fastest Harvard Business Review classic, which means for the amount of downloads and purchases of it, and still comes up in the top searches there. So it just shows you that it's one of those topics that everybody agrees that there needs to be more sales and marketing alignment, but doesn't look like enough people have actually cracked the code on that one yet.
No, but you'll be surprised by the numbers that are coming in. Let me close the poll real quick so I can share the data. So from our audience today, it looks like 67% of attendees say that yes, they are highly collaborative. 27% say no, this is seen as only a sales-only task, and 7% say not sure if either focus much on the sales process.
Well, those are good, great. So Among our audience, we obviously have some organizations or people who represent organizations who really got the sales and marketing alignment thing down, which is fantastic to hear because I think it's something that's just going to become more and more important. And in fact, I believe the lines are blurring so much that who knows what sales and marketing actually look like in the future. But those are interesting statistics. Great. So a lot of you guys have that collaboration going on, and that's just critical to getting your sales process right because it is a shared responsibility. It's not just a sales only consideration. Okay, so let's look at some more action items. So just to reiterate what I said, sales and marketing, sit down and review the information, define the stages of the sales process by identifying significant advances, ensure each stage has buyer-validated actions. Again, buyer-validated actions, so that they're explicit. You can point to them. The salesperson can't interpret because because they're all done in the context of something the buyer has done or said. Optional but highly recommended is scoring. Again, it takes some subjectivity out of it, and it helps salespeople because it helps them understand that they've completed certain actions in a stage. They're ready to move on. Identify target advances so that you can avoid continuation loops, and then identify and create value-added resources to support each stage of the sales process. Okay.
I know we've
So
talked
let's move
about
on to the
scoring,
final piece.
Sorry, I'm going to interject. I have a question. Along with scoring, I know there are certain time allocations for each stage. How do you recommend that people define the appropriate time that you should allow for the buying cycle stages?
Yeah, again, I think those you can gain a lot by looking at your successful sales. So if you take a cross section of your successful sales processes, and when you do some diagnosis, you can start to see what looks like the appropriate time frame for something to be in a particular stage, and how long you believe that it should be in there. So you take your own how quickly you think this should progress, based on the actions your salespeople should be taking, and then you look at that against actual sales cycles, and between those two you can actually start to gauge how long something should be in a particular stage. And again, this can differ for the types of sales. So enterprise versus maybe a more small to medium type of business is going to be a lot different. Sales cycles in enterprise being longer, but applying a little bit of research and comparing to it can give you those durations. All right, so let's talk a little bit now about. So you got your sales process set up, you got it well defined, and now it's all about managing, right? So let's talk about managing your sales process. So what we do repeatedly, this is Aristotle, right? So what does he say? We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, therefore, is not an act, but it is a habit. So it's really important that sales management should be predictable. I think that's one of the most critical pieces, and that it needs to be predictable. And good sales management means your salespeople are focused on good selling habits. So it has to be consistent and it has to be predictable. And the sales process should really enable this focus. But one of the things that always crops up when you talk about management of a sales process is where should sales managers spend most of their time? It's an age-old question, and actually I'd like to run a quick poll again on that. Where in the sales process do you think a sales manager should primarily focus? Early stages to ensure proper qualification? Late stages to help close business, or both equally? Because this is still the work you've done over the years with sales management. This is still one of the greatest areas that needs clarification, and also can mean the difference between effective sales organizations and not so effective.
People are furiously voting.
Excellent. Love this. Thank you all for your interactive participation. It really helps, and it helps us with making this more interesting presentation. But in tune with what I'm saying today, it also helps me get more insights into what's going on with you guys and your organization. So it serves a dual purpose.
Yeah, I love the data that we're seeing today, particularly on the last question, because it was very encouraging. Because usually when I ask people, I see the complete opposite. So the fact that we have a large audience today and the majority of them do see sales and marketing alignment as a high priority and they're making it work is fantastic.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Great, I'm going to close the poll, show the results. So from the people listening today, 25% say early stages to ensure proper qualification, 19% focus on late stage to help close business, and 56% say both equally.
Yeah, it's interesting statistics. I'm going to be very. This is my firm opinion, and it's based on a lot of work done in the past. But early stage is where you create value as a sales manager, right? And unfortunately, under pressure to deliver results and revenue, sales leaders often gravitate towards the latter stages of the sales process because they believe that helping get deals over the line is the best use of their time. But to be honest, by doing so, they often actually implicitly endorse poor selling habits. And it's because late in the stage process, you can't align an opportunity really or properly qualify one. It's kind of too late for that. And then you don't really have many opportunities to coach. And then you often you see sales managers get into super closer mode, where they basically elbow aside the salesperson and try and close the deal, which it's very decredentialing and demotivating for a salesperson. But more often than not, the reason why the sales manager is involved late in the sales process, trying to get things over the line, and there's discounting and all of that comes into play, it's because the opportunity was not properly qualified and properly managed earlier in the sales cycle. So, that's why I believe that early stage is where you can create value. Because then think about it. If you are focused on the late stage, then you're not doing rigorous qualification with your salespeople. You're allowing them to, sometimes skip or make assumptions or whatever. Whereas an effective sales manager would early in the process, coach and really look at the opportunity, make sure it's properly qualified, send the salesperson back for more information if it's not, and make sure that the right opportunity is in the pipeline in the first place. This helps with velocity. It also helps with your win-loss ratio because you're really focusing up front on whether an opportunity should be in your pipeline or not. Obviously there are times when a sales manager will need to get involved in late stages and other stages, but primarily they should be focused on the early stage. It keeps the front end of the pipeline lean and uncluttered. It teaches the salesperson the need to qualify properly and rigorously themselves, so it really reinforces good behavior. And then this is where you can coach. You assess whether the opportunity in the first place fits the ideal target customer profile. Looking at different approaches to the opportunity, maybe looking at opportunities to expand it with more products and services. Using your experience to identify possible roadblocks. Helping to map key players in the organization's role playing. So there's so much value that can be created by the sales manager early in the sales process to help set up the salesperson and the opportunity for success. That is really where the majority of a sales manager's focus should be. Unfortunately, it tends to almost feel counterintuitive at times to sales managers, and given that a lot of sales managers come out of being successful salespeople, their natural inclination is to put on the super closer cape and parachute in at the end and try and help something over the line because that's where they number one, they feel they can, and second off, a lot of them kind of miss that action. The early stage stuff is sometimes not quite as exciting to a sales manager who was recently a salesperson, but that's where you can create create real value. So really, to underline that point, it's, early stage focus delivers results, right? You make your salespeople more effective at actually identifying and qualifying the right opportunities. Let's face it, at the end of the day, we're all pretty simple animals, and where you focus is where they're going to focus. So if your salesperson knows that they have a pipeline review coming up with you, and they know that you're going to focus on the early stage opportunities, and you're really going to want to make sure that they're properly qualified, well, then they're going to pay more attention to ensuring and making sure that they are properly qualified in the first place. So again, you're reinforcing the behaviors and skills that you're looking for. And as a result, there's going to be better forecast accuracy, because your pipeline is going to be populated with those opportunities that have a better than average chance of actually closing. And as a byproduct of that, and a really good byproduct, is you're going to reduce opportunity costs, because you're not going to invest the time or the resources in opportunities that shouldn't be in the pipeline in the first place. And then to top it all, you're going to have more time to invest in coaching and mentoring your salespeople. So you can see that early stage focus is absolutely critical and has so many great benefits for an organization. And this is why top performing sales organizations, they really do focus at the early stages. And another point is, your sales process is actually one of your best coaching tools. Right? It's absolutely one of your best coaching tools. The insights it provides can really help help your salespeople to become more effective. So, for instance, I've taken the example here of velocity. Okay, so you notice, for instance, maybe at the proposal stage, you notice a particular salesperson seems to get stuck there. Their deals sit longer than the targeted duration for that step. What a great opportunity this is to explore what's happening with this particular salesperson. Perhaps they're proposing too early. Maybe they're not explaining the proposal properly. Maybe they've not established the approval process or who's involved well enough. It's a great chance to talk through it. So you can coach and you can help your salesperson draw conclusions themselves. So really draw out of them conclusions about the problem or the opportunity, and what's the impact of them not doing this, and propose actions that will help them achieve a positive outcome, and obviously get them to commit to action and then follow up with them. So your sales process is just fantastic for providing you with so many opportunities to coach and improve your salespeople. And finally, with anything around management, it's all about cadence. You have to establish a cadence, an operating rhythm. If you're always at the end of the sales cycle and you're firefighting, then your salespeople will hear the message that early stage isn't that important, and they'll accelerate opportunities, like I said, that aren't properly qualified. So if you're going to do reviews, you've got to make them consistent and predictable in what you're going to cover. So again, you're helping to teach the salespeople, what they should be looking at. And as for coaching, you should commit to it, put it on the calendar again, and don't cancel it unless it's something absolutely critical, because otherwise you're going to send the message that you're kind of paying lip service to it. So it's really important, and coaching properly, but that's a topic for another day. But it really is really important to establish a cadence, an operating rhythm, a predictability, and show your sales team that you're serious about your reviewing the sales process in the pipeline. You're serious about coaching and you're committed to it, because where you focus is where your team is going to focus. And remember, very few teams ever outperform their manager. So the last thing I'm going to say on sales process is that it's an absolute trove of insight. So you shouldn't look at your, sometimes when people hear the word process, they kind of think, oh, it's just something to be followed, rather than something that's alive and dynamic and actually can provide you with insight. But sales process can absolutely do that. So, you can identify openers versus closers. Maybe you see people in the sales process that seem to be great at the couple of early stages, are great at getting them into the pipeline, the first couple of stages, and then they stall. Or people who struggle with those first couple of stages, but you get them down the stages a few, and then they're fantastic and they can close things much faster. or you see people who seem to sell a lot more to or upsell existing customers or renewals, as opposed to people who seem to bring a lot more new business in, hunters versus farmers. You can see what stages individual salespeople or even your teams get stuck in, so you can do some tweaking. You can see who's good at forecasting, who's not, and who follows the process and who doesn't. And you'll normally find that there's a correlation between that and who is successful and who is not successful. And just remember, this is one thing we talked about earlier, sales process is dynamic because buyer behavior is dynamic. So buyer behavior evolves and it changes. So your sales process should not be something that's static and set in stone. For instance, as Rachel mentioned earlier, duration of stages may change. We may find over time that, we've underestimated the amount of time that a certain stage takes. Based on our experience in sales cycles and what our customer and what we've learned from, recent successful sales cycles. So we can make changes there, or, perhaps our weightings are wrong, or the number of stages are wrong. So it's a dynamic process that you should be looking to tweak and update, as necessary, and as you get more insights. So final set of action items. Manage your sales process consistently. Be predictable. Predictable is not boring. Predictable is actually something that helps people, and it helps your salespeople if they know exactly what you're going to be looking for, and you're going to be managing to it. It also reinforces the importance of the sales process. Focus primarily on early stages of the process. That is absolutely, fundamentally believe that's where you create the most value as a sales manager. And although it may be counterintuitive and you may be tempting to spend a lot more time in later stages, don't. Early is where you're going to create value. Use your sales process as a coaching tool and invest time in reviewing your sales for insights, and then change, manage, and tweak as necessary so your sales process doesn't become stagnant or misaligned or, God forbid, redundant. Okay, I'm just conscious of time here to run up against. So here's the summary, right? Go back now and check. If you don't have a sales process, create one. And if you have one, check it. Make sure it's aligned with your buying process, your buyer's buying process. Make sure you've created well-defined stages. Identify buyer-validated actions. Remember, buyer-validated. Define target advances. How are you going to measure whether a sales cycle is moving forward? Provide value-added resources. Help enable the self-discovery process of your buyer. Enable their appetite for self-education. Manage and coach using the sales process. Be consistent. Always look for individual insights. Tweak and change as needed. If you do these things, I guarantee you will have a sales process that enables and powers your success in 2015 and keeps you in sync and in alignment with your buyers, and also helps your salespeople to be more consistent, have a uniform language, a uniform approach to how they sell, and allow you to really create value as a sales manager by using the sales process to reinforce best practice and best behaviors. Okay, well, that's. I think we have 5 minutes to the hour, so I wanted to see if we had a few more questions before we wrap this up today. Quickly, that's my LinkedIn, that's my Twitter. I'm from Pipeliner, as you know, Pipeliner CRM. We have a fantastic free reference library that you should check out. These are great ebooks and other white papers that can just help you with the whole art of selling. And obviously, we have this wonderful platform, Pipeliner CRM, that actually enables all of the things that I talked about today. And if you're interested in that, I suggest you go to pipelinersales.com and sign up for a 30-day trial. You can do it for free and actually see how a CRM system can actually bring a dynamic sales process alive. Okay, well, with that, Rachel, do we have any more interesting questions to wrap up today with?
We have one question, which is kind of a general question. It's asking if this process or the action items that you're recommending is primarily for a B2B environment, or can it be applied to any sales environment?
Well, what I've outlined today is more B2B related, but it can be applied to B2C as well, because at the end of the day, understanding your customer in a B2C environment and aligning with them, and if you have a sales, whether it's an inside sales or whatever that actually sells into consumers, you can apply this just as much there. Again, I think it's about taking out the things that you see applicable to your environment and focusing in on those. So I absolutely can be used, but it's more B2B related in many ways, but it's not. It can be applied to B2C for sure.
Well, no, I think this was a very actionable webinar. And just for everyone listening, we will be emailing this out to all attendees as well as putting it on our blog.